Hello, hi. Welcome to the Wire Live for April 25th. I'm Devirupa Mitra, the diplomatic editor of The Wire, and I have Siddharth Varadarajan, the founder editor of The Wire. And we're going to take stock of what has happened so far on the diplomatic front in recent developments, which everybody is talking about, which is the India's retaliatory moves against Pakistan following the Pahalgam incident, terror attack, and then followed by Pakistan taking a number of steps which it has announced, including abrogating basically that it will withdraw from the Shimla Agreement, and that it has also declared that if India stops water from the Indus River, that it will be act of war. Uh, can I ask you first of all, starting with the India's retaliatory move? India took 5 steps out of them. Which do you think were the most consequential ones?
Well, the fact is that India-Pakistan relations are already were already at such a low level, but there was hardly anything happening at the bilateral front. That reducing the size of the high commissions, getting rid of the military attaches, shutting down the Wagha-Atari crossing, closing the land route, for trade, is all really not very consequential, because asking all Pakistanis in India to leave. I mean, there aren't, India has not been giving visas to Pakistanis for some time now.
The relations is already very hollowed out.
Exactly. So frankly, there wasn't that much of fat for the Modi government to actually cut away and yet appear as if it was taking action. So I suppose of the measures announced, the decision to hold in abeyance the Indus Waters Treaty, which is kind of in line with what the government has been saying for the last year, that we want to renegotiate this treaty, that the treaty has outlived its use, demographic and ecological factors have overtaken it, etc., etc. I suppose that one announcement is, at least in formal terms, consequential, although, again, in terms of changes on the ground, and we can go into this in detail, I'm not sure what abeyance or refusing to abide by the Indus Waters Treaty will mean in the short to medium term, because the water flows are a factor of nature, geology, geography, ecology. The hydrology of the Indus Water Basin is not something that can be switched on or off by diplomatic fiat, right? So even this is, I would say, a declaration of intent, and one that Pakistan has also chosen to read that way, even if on the ground it doesn't really matter all that much for now.
Right. But the Indus Water Treaty, India has been trying to use it as a lever against Pakistan for some years, right? And it has a long history of India saying to Pakistan that it is possible that we may want to reconsider it for a long time. But Pakistan has never wanted to review it, right?
Well, on the Indus Water Treaty is one of those long-standing bilateral agreements that has held for many decades, has been implemented largely, fairly by both sides, because the way in which the treaty is structured is such that the water flow in the western rivers, which is the Indus, the Chenab, and the Satluj, are reserved exclusively for Pakistan's use, with some minor exceptions in terms of India being allowed to run of the river projects, and the eastern rivers are essentially reserved exclusively for India's use. And so India has, drawn what it can, what it wants to from the eastern rivers. Pakistan doesn't really depend on the eastern rivers for all that much, but the western rivers do matter a great deal for Pakistani, the Pakistani economy, agricultural sector, and so on. So I recall back in 1999, when the Kargil War started, that the then NSA, Brajesh Mishra, kind of, I would say, planted a story or kind of leaked a story to the Hindustan Times, saying that one of the measures India is considering is to scrap the Indus Water Treaty or renegotiate it or whatever. So that was the first time that this issue, to my mind, got flagged in a way that India was regarding the treaty and or looking at the treaty as leverage.
Do you remember what Pakistan's reaction was at that time?
So
Did they take notice of it?
yes, because this information was not contained in an official statement. If I recall, Veer Sanghvi wrote a piece based on what he said was interactions with Indian officials and so on. Maybe he named NSA, maybe he didn't even name Brajesh Mishra. But the assumption was that this has come from Brajesh Mishra as a signaling device to Pakistan. I don't recall the Pakistanis reacting in a very in a formal way, because this was not a government of India position. But yeah, Pakistani analysts at the time did say that this would be something which would be hostile and something that would be. But they also pointed out at the time that, look, it's not such an easy matter, because the fact is that to use the Indus Water Treaty, to cancel the treaty and use the waters of the Indus River Basin as a weapon, which India may like to do under certain circumstances as the upper riparian, is not such an easy matter, right? The geology, the topography of the place, you have to look at where do these rivers flow through in India before they enter Pakistan. Is it possible for you to create storage or diversionary infrastructure that will send the water that you're not releasing to Pakistan towards some kind of use and not cause damage on the Indian side? And the answer is that we don't have those facilities, and those facilities are not easy to build. You can't create large storage capacity in Jammu and Kashmir without all kinds of other negative consequences for the J&K region. And it's not easy to evacuate that water to Punjab or Haryana, quite apart from the political moral arguments that will raise. But but we saw the first response to the flagging of the Indus Water Treaty by the Indian side 2 or 3 years later, when the head of the Strategic Plans Division of Pakistan, General Khalid Kidwai. So for viewers who don't know, the SPD is the sort of apex policy planning division of the Pakistani military handling their strategic assets, their nuclear
arsenal.
Exactly, right? And so it was very rare. Khalid Kidwai had never spoken, and Paolo Cotta Ramusino, who's an Italian scientist, part of Pugwash International. So they'd been very active in terms of having meetings ever since the Pokhran and Chagai tests of 98, in trying to deal with emerging nuclear challenges in the subcontinent. So he was given access to Khalid Kidwai at the end of 2001, and he produced a report at the beginning of 2002, which you read and you've written about in your story, where essentially Ramusino recounts what Khalid Kidwai told him were the circumstances under which Pakistan would consider using nuclear weapons.
And he listed 4 red lines.
Exactly. So he listed 4 red lines. I mean, all of the red lines revolved around the idea that there's an existential threat to Pakistan. And Khalid Kidwai General Kidwai qualified what those would be. And one of them was the economic strangulation of Pakistan. And there, Cotta Ramusino puts in a footnote saying that, giving 2 examples, which obviously have come from General Kidwai. One, the stopping of the Indus rivers, and 2,
the naval blockade.
And so in the Pakistani strategic mindset, the connection was made as early as 2002 and made as part of public signaling that any attempt by India to mess around with the flow of the Indus water system would be seen as not just an act of war, but as an act of war that would then leave Pakistan to say, we reserve the right to use nukes. And as you pointed out in your story, there's a kind of reference to this entire thing in the statement by the Pakistani National Security Committee yesterday in their response to the Indian announcements.
I would also, one is basically about the, perhaps talking about the stoppage of the water, but there are also very, functional issues in the Indus Water Treaty. For example, they used to have regular meetings of the Indus commissioners, their sharing of hydrological data. If all of that is stopped, and and perhaps the waters are not stopped, or we don't go to that extent, that will still have an impact on Pakistan, right? For example, if the hydrological data, which basically gives us certainties to to the farmers about monsoons and flooding, if that doesn't come down to the downstream to the Pakistani shared with the Pakistani government, that will create problems there.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a great point. I think you're right. The upper riparian in an ideal world ought to share hydrological data with the lower riparian, because that allows the lower riparian to plan. And if you, as you know, this is exactly the same issue India has with China, where we are a lower riparian when it comes to the water flows of the Brahmaputra or Yarling Sampo system, right? And we often complain that the Chinese are not sharing data with us, or sharing it in an adequate fashion, or in a fashion that allows us to take action. So this is a complaint of lower riparians throughout the world. I suppose they can live with it if that data is delayed or not given. Certainly, it would not be seen by any rational person as a trigger for using nuclear weapons. But yes, I mean, it would cause discomfort, as would any attempt to alter the predictability and volume of flows in the low season, right? So if you consider the total quantum of water through the western river systems, the three rivers that Pakistan gets to use, is something like 150 million acre feet per annum is the total quantum of flow.
Right.
And India's storage capacity is not even 1% of that, maybe a little bit more than 1%, which, Baglihar, for example, or other minor barrages. So you store that water and you release it in a regulated fashion. So it then becomes available downstream in Pakistan. And I suppose if you hold the treaty in abeyance, then you may play fast and loose with what you release, when you release, etc. But even there, the constraint is that, look, you can stop, you can hold on to water in the low season and not release it. But the fact is that ultimately that water has to be released. So there can be discomfort caused as more water gets accumulated, right? So if you want to not have flooding on the Indian side, you have to release this water.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if India wanted to be nasty, you could play around with that water flow in such a way that you cause flooding and so on. But the thing is that the optics of that, of waging war, using water as a weapon against civilians, I'm pretty sure this is considered a kind of war crime even. In any, if you're kind of targeting civilian power, so deliberately causing a flood as a means of waging war is not something India would like to be seen in the world as doing, right? So I think that India can cause discomfort in the short term, but it's the medium to long term. If you look at Pakistani analysis, there was a very long detailed piece in Dawn newspaper the other day by a professor of environmental sciences, and he was talking again about medium to long term, that if India were to start building serious amounts of storage capacity in J&K, in Ladakh, to dam the waters of the western rivers, that could cause trouble. But again, the limit is that these take time. They're going to take time
and money.
Because it's going to take money, and also then what are you going to use that for? Will you be able to have productive use for it to justify the cost, or is it simply going to be an example of cutting your nose to spite your face, right? So I think that my sense is that the announcements that the Modi government made after the CCS meeting, including the IWT, the Indus Waters Treaty, this was, I think the government felt under pressure, and the Prime Minister himself, because the fact is that he wasn't in the country when this happened. He had to rush back, and he knew that people are going to ask questions about his own political failure, intelligence failure. How did this attack happen? We were, after all, living in a situation where the Home Minister and the Prime Minister had repeatedly not only assured us, but boasted about how their policies had put an end to terror, how they had stabilized and normalized things in Kashmir. And the fact is that if 20 million plus tourists had been going there, this is something that the government was encouraging. And clearly, it was encouraging this in a reckless fashion, because somewhere down the line, it's one thing that you're telling people at large that, everything's normal. But you have those reports. You know that there is a threat. You should have known that the visit of Vice President Vance, just as the visit of Clinton in 2000, is likely to trigger some kind of a terrorist attack, right? So all of this should have been, these are questions people are going to ask. So I think in order to sidestep and ensure those questions are not asked, the government said, okay, let's come out punching. So you had this series of announcements, by the CCS, which are great for optics. They're devoid of any, frankly, any great political punch. And the Pakistani side has responded in a similar fashion.
Can I ask just a last question on the IWT, just for people to understand what does in abeyance mean here? Because people would assume that you basically India should just say that it is withdrawing from the treaty, but here it is used a very legalese terms.
Yeah.
And why is that?
So the Indus Water Treaty is one of those treaties which does not have a termination clause. Many treaties have termination clauses. They allow one party or the other to denounce and walk away. Many treaties don't have that. Some treaties, I should say, don't have that, especially those treaties that are designed to ensure long-term cooperation on fundamental issues. And I think when the Indus Water Treaty was negotiated and eventually brokered by the World Bank, this was seen as a treaty that India and Pakistan as an infant state, India emerging out of partition, would really want to make work because of the common. So you've partitioned the land border, but hydrological systems are common. And I would say perhaps the aim at the time on the part of both Indian and Pakistani leaders was that the cooperation at the treaty level would extend beyond merely sharing of waters to joint plans for watershed development, and particularly in the context of the last 15 or 20 years when climate change has become an important issue, to have joint studies on what the two governments could do together. This has been, experts on both sides have been arguing that the IWT needs to be extended in this fashion, but it doesn't. The fact is, it contains no clause that allows India to walk away. Right. So, what do you do in such a situation? In terms of international law, a treaty of this kind can only be amended, or can be, abrogated, or can be kind of scuttled with the mutual consent of both parties. Right. So, yes, the IWT can be scrapped, but it requires India and Pakistan to both agree to do that, and Pakistan clearly is not going to do that.
And it says that a specific provision they have to create another treaty, if I'm not mistaken.
The assumption is that you then have to. I can't. You may know better than me. I haven't read the text lately, but yeah, I would imagine that it would have, the negotiating intent, right? At the end of the day, you have to look at when you're analyzing treaties and making reasonable interpretation of treaty provisions. International lawyers often look at the papers that form part of the negotiations, right? In order to gauge what the negotiating intent of both sides was. And I think clearly there was an intent on the part of both India and Pakistan at that time to create a system of cooperation on hydrological issues, and particularly the Indus Basin. For perpetuity, because this is it's a permanent public good for South Asia, right? So I'm still, I still remain optimistic that at the end of the day, there will come a time when the people of India and Pakistan will find a way to work this joint resource together. But yeah, as of now, if India wants to play hardball, you can't scrap it, you can't walk away, because that's not part of the treaty. So I suppose holding a treaty in abeyance, there's no provision in the treaty for that. But the letter that the Indian Water Resources Secretary has written to his Pakistani counterpart, these are the water resources ministries, are the line ministries who work the treaty. Has essentially cited India's long-standing grievances and the demographic changes, blah blah blah.
Cross-border terrorism
and cross-border terrorism, not as a security threat so much as a factor which suggests that the treaty is not being implemented in good faith. Right? So every treaty has a good faith clause that both parties will agree to implement this treaty in good faith. So the continuation of cross-border terrorism, you could argue, and the Ministry of Water Resources has, that if you're, you have this treaty, it's not being run in good faith, because at the same time you're creating a permissive environment for the Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed or other terrorist groups to operate from your soil and attack us. So, the Indian letter has made these points, I think, largely for the consumption of lawyers, so that, as and when this matter is litigated, as it is bound to, the letter, gives India a legal leg to stand on. But essentially, holding something in abeyance is just it's a legal trick.
Right.
And I think the idea is to send a signal to Pakistan that it's not as if we are devoid of ways to make Pakistan hurt.
Right.
And as for the practical import, even in the medium to long term, I'm not particularly sure that that's feasible or wise. But that seems to be the government thinking.
Right. The other important piece is basically about the Shimla Agreement, and here Pakistan deployed its own version of legalese, where it used very difficult, complicated language to say it had shall exercise the right to. It's a little complicated. Shall exercise the right to hold all bilateral agreements, including but not limited to the Shimla Agreement. What does it mean exactly?
So, unlike the Pakistani announcement essentially is a declaration of intent that we plan to hold them in abeyance, right? Technically, they haven't put a date or made that formal announcement, but it's clear that the intention is to do that. And again, holding this in abeyance is simply a way of saying, okay, the letter and spirit of these agreements will no longer bind Pakistan. Now, unlike the Indus Water Treaty, all of these other agreements are conventional agreements, and it's easy for a country to walk away from them. It's interesting and important to know that Pakistan is not saying we're walking away, which India might well have said about the Indus Water Treaty if it was structured in that way.
Right.
But these other agreements don't, they may or may not have clauses that allow termination in that way. But it's understood that these are bilateral agreements that are formal treaties, unlike the Indus Water Treaty, right? And here, you have a whole range of agreements going back to partition. Immediately after partition, you have the Liaquat-Nehru Pact, which had to do with the treatment of minorities in each country by the government and non-interference in the affairs of minorities. Now, one could argue that the Liaquat-Nehru Pact today doesn't even obtain, because India frequently comments about the treatment of minorities in Pakistan, and Pakistan doesn't look after its minorities particularly well. And Pakistan frequently comments about the treatment of minorities in India. And India also does not look after its minorities. There is a lot of discriminatory, government action that happens, and the way in which minorities are targeted. So, the fact is that this agreement, for all intents and purposes, doesn't subsist. But you have other agreements that do. Simla is one such agreement, but the operational. I was looking at Shimla Agreement the other day, yesterday after the announcement, just to refresh myself. So I think you have 3 or 4 clauses. 3 out of 4 are very contingent on what was the situation in 71,
right? About
the exchange of prisoners and so on and so forth. Clause 1 is the macro clause, which talks about respect for each other's sovereignty, abjuring the use of force, using diplomatic means to solve problems. And more importantly, that's where the line of control, as the de facto border between India and Pakistan, comes up in a formal sense, right? It's the document that actually, it kind of talks about the sanctity of the LOC. For India, this was important because if you recall the choreography for ending Kargil, so Pakistan always took the view that these are terrorists who have crossed the line of control. We are not involved. But India was able to expose that lie, and India was able to actually play a recording of Musharraf and General Aziz that India was able to obtain.
Of course.
Essentially admitting that these fighters were Pakistani soldiers. Then India was able to build public opinion, and in particular to put pressure on the Chinese and the Clinton administration at the time. And what emerged was that Pakistan was forced to reiterate its commitment to respect the sanctity of the line of control. So when you say we're going to hold the Shimla Agreement in abeyance, which is the foundational agreement which talks of the LOC, is this a statement by Pakistan that we are no longer bound by a commitment to respect the sanctity of the LOC? And of course, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
Right.
If Pakistan says that, then I presume India would also say that the LOC is not something that we are bound to respect either. Although in reality, Pakistan has not respected the LOC because it allows terrorist groups under its control to cross easily. And India has not respected the LOC in the sense that it has acted against terrorists and terror camps and so on, not just during Modi's time. These have been publicized during Modi's time, the surgical strike after Uri and then Balakot, which was, of course, in Pakistan proper. But even during the Manmohan Singh government and perhaps even earlier, there have been incidents where Indian soldiers have crossed the LOC to take punitive action against terror camps. But I suppose this is, what you're flagging, and what we should note through Shimla is that maybe this is bringing so this is restoring the status quo prior to Shimla, when there was no commitment by either side that the LOC is going to be respected.
But what can, in that sense, we think that the reason why we took the action at IWT is basically because we think that Pakistan will hurt in certain, if whatever steps we take, perhaps on water or on hydrological data or what else. How do you think that Pakistan is viewing its step on a Shimla Agreement? How would it impact India? Why would India look at it, the withdrawal of the Shimla Agreement, as a negative step?
Yeah, I think just like Pakistan will look at what India said on the IWT as something that is a declaration of aggressive intent. But they know, upon careful analysis, that the immediate threat posed by this is minimal. Similarly, I think they want India to, in a way, look at Pakistan as a country that is not going to respect, and don't forget, 71 also, the Shimla Agreement comes up. There's a symbolic element to it also, right? That this is an agreement that Pakistan signs after its surrender to Indian soldiers in Dhaka. Bangladesh emerges as an independent country, and then what do you deal with the aftermath of the war? So you have negotiations between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and then the Shimla Agreement emerges. But it's an agreement that has stood the test of time. You have perhaps more critics of Shimla on the Indian side than you have in Pakistan. But at the end of the day, it is a treaty signed by a country that was vanquished on the battlefield. So there is also a symbolic element to saying we're going to hold Shimla in abeyance, meaning that your idea that we are a perpetually vanquished state is something that we don't abide by that. So I suppose there's a kind of signaling and a gesturing, but it's I'm not sure about how much practical content it has or why India would particularly worry about that. I think some of the other agreements, like the pre-notification of missile tests, ballistic missile tests, or every year India and Pakistan exchange lists of nuclear facilities, and that's a major kind of confidence-building measure to make sure that, and then the agreement not to attack each other's nuclear installations,
and also both the fishermen. And the prisoners. That's the biannual exchange.
But although I have to say that even the fishermen's agreements, have kind of gotten unstuck. We hear heartrending stories of fishers from Indian fishers, mainly from Gujarat, who are stuck and languishing in Pakistan. Vice versa, and so it's not as if the agreement on the timely repatriation of fishers has been followed through. It hasn't. But I wonder if the agreement to not attack each other's nuclear installations, which is such an important CBM that India and Pakistan have stood by for years, if that's going to be torn up, or if that's going to be held in abeyance, that doesn't send a very good sign. So maybe Pakistan is trying to signal to the world that the nuclear flashpoint in South Asia that you were so worried about 10-15 years ago, that's back. But the bad news for Pakistan is that the world today is in such a different place, where I think the idea of a nuclear standoff, we're talking of a situation where Russia and Ukraine
and
now
Iran also.
They're in the third year of their war. Russia has spoken about the use of nuclear weapons. You have Iran, Trump threatening Iran. You have talk of Saudi Arabia developing civil nuclear energy. So the nuclear. You have talk of the Polish Prime Minister saying that if Trump does what he's doing, then we should look at having our own nuclear option. So these are all, the world has moved on. So if this is a tactic by Pakistan to alarm the world and invite the West in some way, the West doesn't exist the way it used to exist.
Right.
At the time of Kargil, or even at the time of Balakot. Right. So this is a confrontation that India and Pakistan have to resolve by themselves, and they have to resolve this by themselves by avoiding over aggressive rhetoric, by being cool and calm, by not talking about nuclear issues at the drop of a hat in a kind of irresponsible fashion, but dealing with the problem at hand. And that problem is the permissiveness of the Pakistani establishment towards terrorist groups. So, at the end of the day, Pakistan may say, as they said in a ridiculous way, that this is a false flag operation. But even if you set aside Pahalgam, the whole world knows that Pakistan itself knows and has admitted that folks like Hafiz Saeed or the others who are part of the LET leadership are hardcore terrorists. They are actively involved in planning, plotting, perpetrating, acts which kill innocent people. Why has Pakistan not acted against them? And when they tell India that, oh, we can't find Masood Azhar or we can't find such and such, we're unable to locate and take action, that really stretches the credibility of anybody, right? So we're not, so Pakistan has to own up and take action, and the sooner it does that, the more helpful it will be for Pakistan itself. Which they're not wrong when they say they're dealing with a terrorist threat. They have internal terrorist threats, because once you create groups and allow a permissive atmosphere for these guys, they are going to have their own alliances. They're not always going to listen to you, right? So it's in your interest to act, and Pakistan needs to act, and India needs to find ways to make Pakistan do that.
But would it be, to wrap up, basically, can we say that right now we are going on the same trajectory as what happened last time with Pulwama? Is that the playbook that is basically playing out? We'll have a similar kind of military action. I know we shouldn't talk so loosely about military action. It's a very important escalatory step.
Yeah.
But is there any choice right now?
I'm not going to go into the question of choice or not, because every state has a whole range of methods it can choose to adopt. After the 26/11 terrorist attack, for example, the method that the government of India chose to adopt at that point was to kind of go slow on the rhetoric to begin with, collect the evidence, and prepare, unimpeachable sort of recordings, material that shows the complicity of the Pakistani state, and certainly of Pakistan-based actors. And then you confront Pakistan with that evidence and you share that evidence with the world. I think that approach helped. It didn't bring us justice for 26/11, but it helped stay the hand of these Pakistan-based groups for at least 8 years. From 26/11 till the attack in Pathankot in 2016, we kind of avoided any major incident which took large-scale killing of civilians. And I think that was an effective method the government of India adopted of putting global pressure on Pakistan, forcing Pakistan to admit that it had some cleaning up to do. And it brought us a measure of peace. Didn't always hold, but I think it was quite effective as a means of containing this threat. The approach that the Modi government has taken has been to opt for more kinetic options, right? So you had, after Uri, you had the kind of surgical strike across the LC. Then after Pulwama, you had the Balakot airstrike. I would say, despite the hype, the political hype, it's clear based on what has happened now that these kinds of kinetic responses do not produce the kind of outcome, the strategic outcome that you want, right? So did this disincentivize and stop the threat of terror from Pakistan? Clearly not. Did it give us some short-term tactical gains? Perhaps. Even there, the jury would be out, because of there's a whole raging debate on what damage was caused at Balakot, there is no evidence that's come out into the public domain to allow us to make a clear judgment either way. But in terms of the long-term outcome of Balakot, it's clear that this has not been a deterrent. So when you see that a preferred means of response, the kinetic option, use of force, has not produced the outcome you want, you have two options.
Right.
One is you say, okay, let me apply even more force. And the other option is to say, okay, fine, maybe force is not the answer. Maybe we need to be smarter about this. Set aside the public expectation. Don't succumb to the social media and the sort of jingoistic anchors, because they don't have a measure of statecraft. You are elected to run this government, and to do so in a way that is smart and clever and responsible. So if kinetic means are not producing the outcome that the country wants, then find other smarter means, a combination of means. So these are really the two sets of options, right? And it seems to me, given the political lay of the land, given the kind of political questions about Pahalgam, that the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and his Home Minister Amit Shah would be very keen to avoid anybody asking. And these are questions, incidentally, that have been raised not by the opposition. These are being raised by the victims and survivors of the terrorist attack. Where was the army? Where was the security forces? Why was there intelligence failure? Why were we told everything is peaceful and normal? If the government really believed that Kashmir was open for tourism and the meadow was open for tourism and so on, why didn't it take adequate security measures? These are not questions that Mr. Modi wants to answer. And what better way to avoid answering them than to kind of shift your rhetorical gear, the gear of rhetoric to a higher level, right? And you have a whole media that is, cheering you on in that way. So it's quite possible that the outcome is going to be politically predetermined,
Right.
rather than being determined by a careful, cool analysis of what is needed, what might be effective, and what could produce results.
Right.
So I would say, based on the Pulwama Balakot, a kinetic option looks like fairly likely. And let's keep in mind that just as Balakot produced a Pakistani retaliation, and that retaliation, it could have gone bad pretty fast, right? You had an Indian helicopter that was shot down by friendly fire. You had an Indian pilot who was captured by the Pakistanis, and no matter what retired diplomats may say about how Pakistan was forced to act in a certain way and return the airmen because they were because of Indian threats. We know that probably a lot of international pressure was brought to play. Those pressures may not be around today. So managing the escalation will entirely be something India and Pakistan will have to do. Pakistan will definitely retaliate if India does something kinetic. And then the question is, how many iterations of that are going to happen? Can this be managed? Most importantly, at the end, when the dust settles, will India be in a better position to handle its security, deal with the threat of terror, than otherwise, right? And that's a complex political security intelligence question that has to be answered at many, many different fronts. And one hopes and assumes that the best minds in government are focusing on this, gathering the evidence so that you can indict the individuals and the organizations and the handlers in the same way that we were able to do after 26/11. Don't forget, we celebrated the return of Tahawur Rana to India, but Tahawur Rana is in Indian custody today because of the painstaking approach to gathering of evidence that the Indian authorities under Manmohan Singh did in the aftermath of 26/11. Right? So you built a whole case, which then was so solid and irrefutable that you're able to secure the extradition of this chap. It's a different matter that Headley was some kind of a
double
agent or DEA informant has escaped, reckoning. But Rana's presence in India is the product of a certain approach which paid dividends and continues to pay dividends. So I think there's much to be said for not being in a hurry to respond, not being in a hurry to kind of make strong statements, but to gather your information, evidence, also assess what went wrong, make sure that there's no repeat. That has to be the first priority, to ensure that there is no aftermath of this in the valley or anywhere else in the country. That also includes tamping down on the communal rhetoric that the politicians and Hindutva activists who seem to be hell-bent on acting as force multipliers of the Lashkar-e-Taiba by doing the dirty work of dividing Indians on the basis of religion. So it means putting a stop to that. It means the Prime Minister using his moral authority with this right-wing faction to tell them that this is not going to be tolerated. It requires the government of India to tell every state government that you are duty-bound to protect Kashmiri students who are in Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh. Do not allow them to be targeted. We see none of that, but one hopes that in the days to come, there will be more and more responsible sort of steps taken by the government to ensure that this front is contained and that you're able to deal with the threat of terror and neutralize this threat in ways that are effective in the long term.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Siddharth, for explaining to our viewers what is the current state of play about the whole India-Pakistan issue, which is a perennial issue, and we will be talking about it, I'm sure, for not just days and months, but years to come. And thank you for watching, and please stay with The Wire. Thank you.
Thank you.